In his evidence on Friday, Mr. Blair gave the view that, and I'm going to quote here, if we'd left Saddam there with the intent to develop these weapons and the know-how and the concealment program and the sanctions had gone, today we would be facing a situation where Iraq was competing with Iran, competing on both nuclear weapons capability and competing as well in support of terrorist groups. I've left a few words out in the middle of those quotations where they simply interrupt the flow, but you can see the full quotation in the transcript. Now, that's what Mr. Blair, I think, called his 2010 question. Was it a question that we actually either had to take military action to topple Saddam in order to remove this threat, or, if we didn't do so, Iraq was going to become both a nuclear and a terrorist threat, as Mr. Blair suggested in his 2010 question?
No, I think that's, historically inaccurate. For example, well, first of all, there was what the stated policy was supposed to be, which was we can't leave Saddam Hussein there, not in compliance with the UN, and sanctions forever, and they're eroding, therefore we need to take action, the argument that I agree with. But there was no evidence of any kind of an escalation of threat, so there was no hurry. I mean, that's one of the kind of untruths, the exaggeration of the risk of the WMD. So get the inspectors back in, get disarmament and compliance. If you get that, the logic is release sanctions, open up the country. Now, going on alongside that, and I'm sure that's in the public domain, were initiatives from the Saudis and the Jordanians about possibly getting Saddam Hussein to go into exile, which would have been an attractive option, it seems to me. The intelligence was that there was no nuclear and he didn't have the means, but if he could have done it, he would, so there was no immediate threat there. And the evidence on the chemical and biological was people thought there were laboratories and people working. There were doubts even if it was weaponized. So surely, if we'd gone more calmly and slowly, I would have liked Saddam Hussein to be sent to the International Court for crimes against humanity and crimes against peace, as we got Milosevic. I remember Anne Clwyd bringing that up in the House of Commons and Tony Blair saying he was looking at it, but it was never seriously looked at. So I am saying that we could have gone more slowly and carefully and not had a totally destabilised and angry Iraq into which came al-Qaeda that wasn't there before, and that would have been safer for the world, and that Tony Blair's account of the need to act urgently somehow because of September the 11th, I think doesn't stack up to any scrutiny whatsoever. We've made Iraq more dangerous as well as causing enormous suffering and diminishing our reputation.
So you think that there were alternative ways, other than toppling Saddam Hussein, of preventing him from becoming a more serious threat?
Well, as I've said, Saudi Arabia and Jordan were talking about getting him into exile. There was the possibility of the International Criminal Court. He wasn't popular in his country. I mean, there's an argument about very strong sanctions that you actually lock countries in, and it's better to open them up, because then, as with Serbia, that's the way we got, in the end, the people of Serbia sent Milosevic to the International Criminal Court. That was all another option.
But what about the argument that Saddam would have become a supporter of international terrorism?
Well, firstly, I mean, the American people were misled to suggest that al-Qaeda had links to Saddam Hussein. Everybody knows that is untrue, that he had absolutely no links, no sympathy. Al-Qaeda were nowhere near Iraq until after the invasion and the disorder that came from that. So there's no doubt that by invading in this ill-prepared, rushed way, not only did we cause enormous suffering and loss of life, we made Iraq more dangerous and unstable and spread al-Qaeda's presence in the Middle East. So I'm afraid...
Was Saddam a supporter of international terrorism?
I believe, I remember this back from my advice bureau, they used to send people to get students here who were not sympathetic to the regime. There was that kind of activity. That's not the same. In no way, shape or form did he have any links or sympathy with al-Qaeda type ideas.
You've made several references now to Kosovo and Serbia and so on. Now, you strongly supported the action taken in Kosovo, where we also did not have the endorsement of the Security Council, and which is an action which Mr. Blair, in his Texas speech and subsequently to a degree indeed in his evidence on Friday, has held up as a positive example of regime change. Why was it right to use force against Milosevic, one of the semi-fascist dictators, as Mr. Blair called them, but not against Saddam Hussein, who arguably was a nastier and more dangerous semi-fascist dictator?
Well, in international law, although this is an evolving area, there is agreement amongst most people, including Kofi Annan, who said it publicly, that military action to prevent a humanitarian emergency is permissible. And I remember the strange precedent they used to give Tanzania's invasion of Uganda, which just seemed such a strange one, but that was all in the argument at the time. And Kofi Annan said, when I became Secretary General of the UN, I didn't do it just to protect the sovereignty of states, but also to protect the human rights of people. So there was a much, much bigger consensus. I mean, my own view on Serbia's expansion and all the ethnic cleansing is that we should have acted earlier to prevent it, and we could have done that, and we had a very weak UN peacekeeping thing that just took in supplies, and I think you could have protected Sarajevo and stopped the attacks myself. So it was last minute, it was universally agreed, it was the refugees were pouring over the border, that's where I first, or they were stuck at the border, that's when I first met Tim Cross. So it was a different case. And one has to look at I mean, of course, there's lots of nasty regimes in the world, some of which are our friends, if you come to the Middle East. But you have to go case by case, and you have to look what your objective is and what is best for the people of that country and the world and how you can best act, and you need to do this in a considered way. And what we did in Iraq was very dangerous, ill-considered, and has made Iraq more dangerous and destroyed lots of property and destroyed lots of people's lives.